Would the world today be as it is without the influence of Niccolò Machiavelli? Ponder on that for a moment. Born in the heart of the Renaissance, Florence, Italy, in the year 1469, Niccolò Machiavelli was a man of many talents. A diplomat, a philosopher, a statesman, and a writer, he stood at the intersection of politics and philosophy, shaping both for centuries to come. In 1502, Machiavelli was appointed as the Second Chancellor of the Republic of Florence, a role that placed him at the center of the city's political world. His time in office was marked by diplomatic missions to the courts of France and Rome, where he observed the workings of power and politics. However, it was in 1512 when the Medici family overthrew the Republic, and Machiavelli was ousted from his position that he began to write his most influential works. In his rural retreat, Machiavelli penned The Prince, a treatise on political power that continues to shape our understanding of leadership and statecraft. The Prince presented a new vision of power, one that was pragmatic rather than idealistic. Machiavelli argued that a ruler should do whatever is necessary to maintain power and protect the state, even if it means compromising morality. This philosophy, often dubbed Machiavellian, has influenced countless leaders and political thinkers since. Machiavelli's influence extends far beyond The Prince, however. His discourses on Livy offer a deep dive into the workings of republics, while his Art of War provides a comprehensive guide to military strategy. These works, rooted in historical analysis and practical wisdom, have shaped not only political theory, but also fields as diverse as business strategy and leadership studies. In the course of 7 centuries, Machiavelli's ideas have traveled from the courts of Renaissance Italy to the corridors of power around the world. His philosophy, with its focus on power, pragmatism, and the harsh realities of political life, continues to resonate in an era marked by geopolitical turmoil and ethical dilemmas. To summarize, Niccolò Machiavelli, a man born in the heart of the Renaissance, has left an indelible mark on the world. Through his works, he gave us a new understanding of power, one that is pragmatic and realistic. His ideas, encapsulated in works such as The Prince, have influenced leaders, thinkers, and strategists for centuries. Even today, in an era of uncertainty and change, Machiavelli's influence remains as potent as ever. So, would the world today be as it is without the influence of Niccolò Machiavelli? The answer, quite simply, is no. His ideas continue to shape our understanding of power and politics, reminding us that in the harsh world of statecraft, pragmatism often trumps idealism. Niccolò Machiavelli is one of the most influential and controversial political philosophers in history. As an Italian diplomat, philosopher, and historian who lived during the Renaissance period, Machiavelli provided penetrating insights into statecraft, power, human nature, and morality that shaped modern political thought. Through his most famous work, The Prince, as well as Discourses on Livy and the Art of War, Machiavelli analyzed how rulers can gain, maintain, and expand political power in an uncertain world. Machiavelli lived during a turbulent time in Italian and European history. The Italian city-states were in conflict as France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire battled for control over the peninsula. As a high-ranking bureaucrat in Florence, Machiavelli had an inside view of the shifting fortunes of the Italian city-states as they desperately tried to retain their autonomy. This first-hand experience with political instability informed his unconventional and at times amoral advice to rulers in The Prince. While Machiavelli is most famous for supposedly advocating cruelty, deception, and immorality, a deeper examination of his full body of work reveals a profound and nuanced thinker. Machiavelli did not necessarily endorse ruthless policies, but rather described effective strategies that he observed in history. His emphasis on realism over idealism, adaptation over fixed principles, and solid analysis over wishful thinking established Machiavelli as the first modern political philosopher. He initiated core concepts of Western political thought, from the separation of politics and ethics to the notion of raison d'etat, national interest. Machiavelli's ideas on republicanism and political liberty also influenced modern democratic thought. Welcome to Top Thangs. Today, we will analyze Machiavelli's central ideas, historical context, enduring influence, and the debate over interpretations of his work. It will describe how Machiavelli departed from traditional political thought and laid the foundations for modern Western political philosophy. While there remains significant controversy over Machiavelli's legacy, his penetrating observations into statecraft and human behavior offer enduring insights relevant today. Historical context of Machiavelli's life and work. To fully understand Machiavelli's unconventional philosophy, it is essential to examine the tumultuous era in which he lived and worked. Machiavelli was born in Florence in 1469 during the Italian Renaissance. This was a remarkable period of artistic and intellectual achievement, as Italian city-states nurtured the values of humanism, patronized the arts, and financed major architectural and cultural projects. The Renaissance humanists emphasized the dignity of man and studied classical Greek and Roman texts on rhetoric, history, ethics, and politics. However, underneath this flourishing culture and reviving economy, the Italian city-states faced growing political turmoil. The stability and prosperity of the High Middle Ages was fading as various Italian principalities, papal states, and republics vied for power on the peninsula. Foreign kingdoms like France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire sought to conquer parts of Italy to add to their domains. As a result, Machiavelli personally observed how fragile the autonomy of the Italian city-states was in the face of more unified nation-states. Machiavelli served Florence in various administrative roles starting in 1498. In particular, he undertook diplomatic missions across Italy and to foreign royal courts, assessing the power dynamics firsthand. This provided him an invaluable education in political strategy and history as he strove to advance Florence's interests. Machiavelli had to negotiate with cunning rulers like Cesare Borgia, admiring their shrewd tactics while defending Florentine independence. Machiavelli's political career reached its pinnacle when he was appointed Second Chancellor and Secretary to the Ten of Liberty and Peace, essentially serving as Secretary of War and Foreign Affairs. This provided him an insider's perspective on governance and power. However, when the Medici family returned to power in 1512, Machiavelli was dismissed, accused of conspiracy, imprisoned, and tortured. After his release, he retired to his estate and focused on studying classical texts and writing his political works based on his governmental experiences. The chaotic regional politics that Machiavelli participated in shaped his unconventional philosophy that emphasized adaptation and cunning over moral action. The incessant wars, shifting alliances, betrayals, and power politics convinced him that rulers could not simply be good, but must be shrewd and flexible to achieve their aims. Machiavelli analyzed what was effective in building power, not what was morally correct. This was a major break from medieval and Renaissance thinkers who focused on ethical statecraft. Additionally, the fact that Machiavelli derived many of his examples from ancient Greek and Roman history, rather than the Bible or church doctrine, was quite controversial at the time. However, Machiavelli was not particularly religious and studied classical texts on statecraft and military affairs voraciously, seeking practical wisdom. This background set the stage for Machiavelli's radical ideas that placed human agency, reason, and national interest above faith or ideology when determining policy. Major political works and ideas of Machiavelli. Machiavelli explored his iconoclastic political ideas in several seminal works, most prominently in The Prince, Discourses on Livy, and The Art of War. These books, informed by his career in Florentine government and study of history, established Machiavelli as the originator of modern political thought. He advanced a pragmatic, flexible, and calculated view of acquiring and expanding state power, departing sharply from the Christian morality and utopianism of medieval thinkers. The Prince. This short treatise, written in 1513 and published in 1532, after Machiavelli's death, focuses on the acquisition, maintenance, and growth of political power. While seemingly written as advice for rulers, particularly as a guide for Medici ruler Lorenzo de' Medici to unify Italy, the book actually contains more general maxims on statecraft. The Prince outlines effective strategies Machiavelli observed worked for historical and contemporary rulers. The book broke fundamentally with the classical and medieval tradition of mirrors for princes literature that provided ethical, philosophical, and religious guides for monarchs. Instead, Machiavelli focused purely on what worked in building and preserving power, not moral considerations. His empirical, consequentialist approach, analyzing successful strategies and policies, was groundbreaking. Some of Machiavelli's most famous advice includes, "It is better for a ruler to be feared than loved, since fear is more dependable than affection. Committing abhorrent acts to instill fear is preferable to developing loyalty through virtuous acts. A wise ruler needs to be able to act immorally and break promises when necessary. Rulers must learn to be able not to be good, and use or not use this ability based on necessity. Cunning and deceit can be legitimate tools for a ruler. However, the ruler should try to avoid hatred and create an appearance of virtue. Fortune heavily influences worldly events, so a ruler must be flexible and ready to adapt as needed to changing circumstances. A new ruler in a conquered territory should eliminate all threats to his power to stabilize his regime, even if it requires violence and repression. These maxims shocked contemporary readers and challenged traditional Christian views of ethical statecraft. However, Machiavelli argued these harsh methods are sometimes required due to the inherent complexity and difficulty of gaining power and authority over people. The norms of regular morality do not apply to rulers in Machiavelli's paradigm. Discourses on Livy. In this extended work, Machiavelli examines the politics of republics based on his study of the Roman historian Livy. While The Prince covers monarchies and autocracies, Discourses analyzes popular governments ruled through consent. Some of Machiavelli's key arguments include: popular governments are more stable and long-lasting than autocracies, since they enjoy wider support and participation from citizens. However, to avoid chaos and factionalism, republics need wise laws and strong leaders. Republican leaders must rouse their citizens with appeals to patriotism and civic virtue to unite them behind the common good rather than narrow interests. Opposing humors, social groups like nobility versus commoners, should be balanced and contained within the republican system through wise political institutions. Republics can incorporate some qualities seen as vices, like ambition, to create beneficial competition and innovation. Private vices, if properly regulated, can become public virtues. Popular governments progress slowly and face gridlock, requiring manipulation by great leaders to navigate differing interests. While Machiavelli admires republics in some ways, he believes they require strong, even authoritarian leaders to function well. He advocates for limited participation by citizens and mistrusts the broader population's wisdom and virtue. Machiavelli emphasizes the need for political leaders to manage messy popular rule behind the scenes through cunning and adaptation. The Art of War. This treatise explores military strategy and organization based on Machiavelli's study of Roman history. He advocates for citizen armies where soldiers have a stake in the society they are defending. Mercenaries, by contrast, lack loyalty and commitment since they fight for money rather than patriotism or civic duty. Some additional key arguments include: military capability is vital for any ruler or state seeking to expand and secure its power. A strong military acts as deterrence against enemies. Infantry armies with high morale and skill based on drilling and discipline are superior to cavalry or irregular fighters. New domains and territories are most easily won through one's own arms and forces, rather than reliance on allies or diplomacy. Machiavelli views warfare as inevitable, and thus believes rulers must study the arts of military strategy and organization. While he extols citizen armies, Machiavelli approves of any tactics and practices that lead to victory, including cruel or immoral acts that inspire terror in enemies. His thinking in the art of war reinforces his emphasis on adaptation and realism over ethical considerations when making policy. Key innovations and concepts introduced by Machiavelli. Machiavelli's political works introduced groundbreaking ideas that helped launch modern political philosophy. His thoughts departed radically from medieval and early Renaissance writers focused on justice, virtue, and theology. Instead, Machiavelli took a pragmatic and flexible approach to power politics, advising rulers on successful statecraft based on reasoned analysis and observation, rather than morality or religion. Some of his seminal innovations and concepts include separation of politics and ethics. Machiavelli argues morality does not apply in governance as it does to regular people, given the necessities and constraints rulers face. Politics exists in its own sphere, separate from conventional ethics. Rulers must be judged by results and consequences, not by the morality of their methods. The end justifies the means for Machiavellian leaders. Raison d'etat. This French term meaning reason of state or national interest flows directly from Machiavelli's philosophy. He argues the paramount duty of rulers is to pursue policies that expand the state's interests and power. Moral ideals or theological principles should not interfere with raison d'etat. Realism. Machiavelli emphasizes pragmatic realism in his analysis of successful exercise of power. He focuses on how men and rulers actually behave rather than utopian visions of how they should act. This attempt at value-neutral realism was pioneering for the time period and study of politics. Fortuna. Machiavelli personifies fortune as a force of history that rulers must adapt to and manipulate. Since chance heavily influences events, rulers cannot just rely on fixed virtues or principles, but must flexibly respond to shifting circumstances and random fortune. Necessita. The concept of political necessity also recurs in Machiavelli's writings. Drastic actions including violence, deceit, or betrayal may be necessary evils that rulers must resort to under certain conditions to achieve important state goals and security. Glory-seeking. In The Prince, Machiavelli emphasizes rulers should seek to achieve glory and greatness through renowned feats. Unlike classical thinkers, he saw ambition and desire for fame as a useful motivation for rulers that leads to impressive achievements benefiting society. Cunning and deception. While traditional thinkers viewed cunning as a vice, Machiavelli treats it as an essential political tool. Rulers must utilize shrewdness, foresight, and deception to best competitors and enemies and successfully manipulate events in their favor. By separating politics and ethics into different spheres of human life, Machiavelli freed governance and statecraft from the prevailing constraints of Christian morality. This allowed him to take an unsentimental, analytical approach focused purely on effective means rather than ideal ends. These innovative concepts Machiavelli introduced fundamentally altered political thought in the West. Enduring influence of Machiavelli on modern political philosophy. Machiavelli's ideas may have been shocking for his era, but they soon exerted tremendous influence. His rejection of idealism, introduction of realpolitik, and advocacy for a rational, scientific method in analyzing power politics changed political theory permanently. While controversial even today, Machiavelli is widely recognized as the originator of several core concepts that shaped modern Western political philosophy. Some of his most important intellectual legacies include separation of state and church. Machiavelli's separation of politics and ethics challenged the then dominant influence of Catholic Church doctrine on state policy. He articulated the idea of a secular state guided by reasoned analysis of public interests rather than theology. Nationalism. Machiavelli's emphasis on pursuing the state's interests and power laid the basis for later nationalism in Europe. His writings helped replace medieval universalism with developing nation-states defined by geography, culture, and language in the modern era. Republicanism. While Machiavelli focused on princely rule, his examination of republics in Discourses helped revive interest in participatory government in Europe. His qualified defense of republics inspired later Enlightenment Republican thinkers. Social contract theory. Machiavelli's view of the state as an artificial creation organized to provide security and order foreshadowed later social contract theorists like Hobbes and Rousseau. Citizens accept the state's authority in exchange for its promised benefits. Realpolitik. The German term realpolitik emerged directly from Machiavelli's pragmatic political realism focused on outcomes rather than ideals. Bismarck later utilized Machiavellian realpolitik to advance Prussian interests through crafty diplomacy and war. While at times amoral, Machiavelli liberated politics from philosophy by examining powerful techniques that actually worked for rulers in history. By focusing on means over ends and observation over imagination, he pioneered many core ideas of modern political science and statecraft. Machiavelli's influence is still visible today in the separation of church and state, nationalism, power politics, and other key concepts. Contrasting interpretations of Machiavelli's philosophy and legacy. Given the radical nature of his writings, Machiavelli's work has long engendered controversy and debate. Was Machiavelli truly endorsing the cunning, violence, and deceit described in The Prince? Or was he simply painting a realistic descriptive portrait of effective political statecraft? Scholars remain divided over how to interpret Machiavelli's political philosophy and his place as a founder of modern Western political thought. The black versus white Machiavelli debate. Traditional interpretations view Machiavelli as teacher of evil, black Machiavelli. His advocacy for cunning, force, and calculated immorality seems to celebrate ruthless totalitarianism. However, revisionist interpretations, white Machiavelli, argue he simply described successful realpolitik without necessarily endorsing it. Since Machiavelli served Republican Florence, he could not have supported tyranny in reality. Evidence for black interpretation. Literal reading of Prince suggests Machiavelli advocates cunning and deceit as wise statecraft, praise for bold and decisive acts of violence like Cesare Borgia's conquests. stresses need for selective use of morality based on necessity. People are portrayed as weak and unintelligent, requiring Machiavellian strongmen to govern. Evidence for white interpretation. Other works like Discourses support popular government over despotism. The prince gives rational advice to Medici, ruler though may use sarcasm or irony. Explains political realities and necessity rulers face without moral judgment. Seeks to liberate politics from philosophical, religious constraints. This debate continues today. However, most contemporary scholars adopt more nuanced views, recognizing the complexity of Machiavelli's thought. Rather than exclusively black or white, the reality likely lies somewhere in between. Machiavelli did not invent ambition or deceit in politics, but described their effective use by past leaders. However, the way he separated morality from politics left open the door for ruthlessness. His controversial realism has enduring relevance. Machiavelli's morality and views on human nature. Related to these debates are questions on Machiavelli's views of morality and human nature. While not an idealist, he did have a moral framework promoting civic virtue and patriotism in his writings. Yet he largely separates private morality from the political sphere when advising rulers. This has led to clashing interpretations of Machiavelli as completely amoral, endorses any means for political gain. Contextual moralist, morality dependent on political circumstances. Cunning preacher using irony, secretly hoped to shock rulers into virtue by depicting vice. Teacher of necessary evil, harsh methods required in chaotic times. Machiavelli's portrayal of human nature also varies. From cynicism, seeing people as weak and dumb, to optimism regarding their growth through strong institutions. In reality, Machiavelli appears to have a pragmatic view of human nature, guided by context and conditions rather than fixed ideals. His flexibility makes a single interpretation difficult. Machiavelli's enduring relevance. The ongoing debates over Machiavelli's writings reinforce just how revolutionary his ideas were for his era. By focusing on power politics grounded in reality rather than theology or idealism, he introduced an entirely new approach to political theory. Concepts Machiavelli pioneered, from raison d'etat to realpolitik to the separation of politics and ethics, became pillars of modern political philosophy. While open to varying interpretations, Machiavelli's body of work contains profound insights into statecraft, power dynamics, and leadership strategy. His unconventional and controversial rejections of traditional morality remain relevant as warnings of how unconstrained politics can lead to cruelty. Yet Machiavelli was also a patriot who hoped Italy could be unified under wise leadership, even if it required difficult means. Machiavelli will always be remembered for the cunning maxims of rulership laid out in The Prince, but his calls for civic virtue, classical training for leaders, adaptable institutions, and citizen armies show glimmers of his underlying values. By studying successful policies utilized by ruthless leaders, yet advocating for republics as an ideal, Machiavelli defies simple categorization. This complex, intellectually daring Renaissance thinker remains deeply influential, with his fingerprints on core notions of the modern state. Nearly 500 years after his death, Machiavelli's writings continue to provide profound if troubling insights that both followers and critics can appreciate. Thank you for watching Top Thangs.